The Ark of the Covenant. A lot of people first really found out, even Christians found out about the Ark of the Covenant through Indiana Jones and the search for the lost Ark. And there actually was a good amount of truth in what was presented there, although there was a lot that was not so truthful, um, that it was purely a communications device, and then it had all of these incredible powers. Well, what we do know is that the Ark of the Covenant was holy to such a degree that if someone touched it um, who was not really accepted by God, who was not holy, who was not God's, even for good purposes, it was destructive. The We saw that in a couple of places in the scriptures with the Philistines when they captured the ark. It was a real problem for them. Uh, the ark ultimately, once it was taken, that caused plagues amongst the Philistines. Um, they brought it in by Dagon, their god, and the next morning Dagon was flat on his face. Um, and then they straightened Dagon up, and the next morning he was broken and destroyed really for good. And that was symbolic. It's not that the ark itself, and some people think this, have that somehow that is the seat of God's power. It is not. Um, but it is an incredible, incredible construction guided by God. And God instructed Moses to produce it. And he said, make an atonement cover of pure gold over this ark, 2.5 cubits long and a cubit and a half wide. Make two cherubim out of hammered gold at the ends of the cover, and so you can see them above. Now, the depiction of the cherubim here, it's not what I would think, but I think it's close. You see some where the wings swoop upwards, but nonetheless, the angels are facing one another. The cherubim, um, we'll read about those a little later in Ezekiel chapter 1. But the cherubim were the guardian angels, not guarding God, but guarding sinful beings from coming into the presence of God. You see there an attempt to depict what was built as the ark, and the description in Exodus given to Moses was make one cherub on one end, the second cherub on the other, make the cherubim of one piece with the cover. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. At the two ends. So this is a solid block of gold. The cherubim are to have their wings spread upward, overshadowing the cover with them. The cherubim are to face each other, looking toward the cover. Okay, and so it certainly depicts that. Place the cover on top of the ark and put in the ark the tablets of the covenant law that I will give you. There, above the cover, between the two cherubim that are over the ark of the covenant, I will meet with you and give you all my commands for the Israelites. The basic construction, and many of you have seen this before, is depicted there. It's all covered in gold and would have been extremely heavy to lift. Hence, you see the poles that are also gilded sliding through the hoops on either side. So those loops that are there, or those hoops that are there, um, they would slide through so that nobody had to touch the ark. They only touched the poles. So when it moved, they were able to just put men on both sides and lift it up and carry it, which they did. At times, they even carried it into battle. Um, it was carried around Jericho, and it led the procession of all the people around Jericho for those 7 days. And we really don't stop to think of how athletic the men must have been who carried it, because this is a lot of gold. It's hard to imagine. The angels alone would have been quite heavy, but the entire thing. incredible. Okay, so the let's see if we can get this PowerPoint to move properly. Okay, so it was intended to be a model. As it's not exactly a scale model, but God said to Moses, make it exactly according to the instructions that I give you. So there's an element in which it's a form of a scale model. All right. Now, when I was a kid, I used to make model cars. You could buy kits from Revell, and there were a few other companies like that. And it was always a lot of fun to put them together. Okay, it wasn't the real car, but it gave you a picture of what the real car was in three dimensions. And in some way, this is picturing what you would see if you were in the presence of God in some way. And so I'll share with you a little bit about what that some way may have been. Let's go to Ezekiel chapter 1. Here you have Ezekiel in the 30th year of the captivity in Babylon, and he's standing by the Kibar River, and he says, on the 5th of the month, in the 5th year of King Jehoiakim, the word of the Lord came to him. And then we see what he has to say. He says, I looked, so he's recounting what he saw, and I saw a windstorm coming out of the north, an immense cloud with flashing lightning surrounded by brilliant light. The center of the fire looked like glowing metal, and in the fire, what looked like four living creatures. In appearance, their form was human, but each of them had four faces and four wings. And then it goes through with a rather frightening description of them. These are angels. And their faces had the face of a human being, and then on the right side, the face of a lion, on the left, the face of an ox. Each also had the face of an eagle. Now, I don't know if there is symbolism there, or if that's exactly what they looked like, but this was his attempt to describe what he saw. Each had two wings spreading out upward, each wing touching that of the creature on either side. Each had two other wings covering its body. Okay, so what you saw on the top of the Ark of the Covenant were the angels with their wings touching, and this space between them and underneath their wings. And let me go down a bit farther. They spread out above the heads of the living creatures was what looked something like a vault, sparkling like crystal and awesome. So when it says something like a vault, like the sky, or like the ceiling of a huge room, the domed ceiling of a huge room. Under the vault, their wings were stretched out one toward the other. Each had two wings covering its body. When the creatures moved, I heard the sound of their wings, like the roar of rushing waters, like the voice of the Almighty, like the tumult of an army. When they stood still, they lowered their wings. Now, if you've ever heard an army marching in the distance, everyone in lockstep, you know that the earth shakes. There is a roar. It is incredible. And these few angels, as they moved, made that kind of sound. And then we read, then there came a voice from above the vault, from the sky, basically over their heads as they stood with lowered wings. And above the vault over their heads was what looked like a throne of lapis lazuli. That's kind of a bluish color. And high above on the throne was a figure like that of a man. Okay, so this is described as a throne. And there is someone that is like a man, but different in that I saw that from what appeared to be his waist up, he looked like glowing metal. Okay, so you can imagine what glowing metal looks like. Perhaps you've seen glowing metal in pictures of a steel factory as they pour it, but the metal as if full of fire, and that's from his waist up. And that from there down, he looked like fire, and brilliant light surrounded him. Okay, so do you get the picture? This is a man who appears to be almost on fire, but not a man. Um, but it goes beyond this. We're thinking in terms of color, maybe a bright white or orange or even a reddish hue. But it says no. It's like the appearance of a rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day. So was the radiance around him. Okay, so here you have this being who is described as being on a throne between the angels, and he has around him the appearance of a rainbow, basically all the colors of the rainbow. And then we're told what this is, what Ezekiel is looking at. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. And when I saw it, I fell face down and I heard the voice of one speaking. So that is what is referred to as the Shekinah glory, the glory that is with us. Now, technically, the Shekinah glory is God's glory as it appears over the mercy seat in the tabernacle between the angels. So let's go back and look again at what we looked at before. In the space, I don't know if you see the arrow or not, but in the space between the angels and above the mercy seat, that is where the glory of the Lord appeared. Only the light, this incredibly bright light, and it would have been multicolored. Okay, and so the rainbow is what you would see, the colors of the rainbow, if you were in the presence of God. And when you read in Revelation, when you read in various places, you see that anytime the presence of God is described, it is you have the presentation and of various colors of various gems to describe what he looked like. And it's just the idea that uh, he is not he's not just white light. He is multicolored, and of course, white includes all the colors, and the total opposite of darkness. But the rainbow, where have you seen that before? Well, obviously, that was the sign given to Noah, God's sign placed in the heavens. Okay, and so we look at the Ark of the Covenant, and what it is doing is providing in the presence of the Israelites, it is providing an image of the throne of God. Okay, it's not the throne of God. The space between the angels is as close as the Israelites ever got to being commanded to build an image of God. They never built an image of God like the gods and goddesses of the ancient world. Dagon had a statue. Um, the various other gods and goddesses had statues. In this case, in the case of the true God, it's only a space between the angels. And God manifested himself there. It wasn't all of God. God is everywhere. But in that one place, God chose to communicate with Moses. And in that one place, he put this ark, this model, so that every year on Yom Kippur, the high priest could come and pour a bowl full of blood over the top of this golden ark. Now, you can only begin to imagine what it would have looked like after years of annually pouring blood over the ark. There is no indication that they ever washed the ark. It was covered in blood, and over time, it would have become black, darkened by that blood, so that you wouldn't have been able to tell all of the features and the details. And that blood, of course, was the sacrifice being offered for the sins of the people, specifically on Yom Kippur, the sins committed in ignorance. Now, the dimensions of the ark are relatively small, 45 inches by 27 inches by 27 inches, basically 4 feet by 2 feet by 2 feet. And it was acacia wood overlaid with pure gold. If it were all gold, obviously it would have been too heavy to lift. Um, and the mercy seat was really the critical, most important portion of the ark. Now, there are various pieces to it, but uh, ultimately, the mercy seat is what I believe should be most important to all of us. The indication that God shows mercy. Inside the Ark of the Covenant, you had the law. You had the tablets that were given to Moses of the law. But we can't keep the law. And so we need God's mercy because we can't keep the law and we can't pay the penalty for those who break the law, which is death. And so God offers this mercy seat. Now, in the ark, you have two stone tablets that are there, the tablets of the law. Now, it's interesting. On the tablets that you see in the picture, they have Roman numerals. Those are Roman numerals. Actually, the amongst the Hebrews, amongst the Jews at that time, they had no numbers. Their letters were numbers, but certainly they didn't use Roman numerals. But that's okay. You get the idea anyway. And then in the middle, you see a a bowl of manna. It actually was a pot of manna, and it's a golden bowl. And then the rod of Aaron that budded. Now, the mercy seat. The mercy seat is described a bit more in Exodus 25. I'm going to go over there. So I'm going to jump back again. My apologies. I had hoped to do this all on one screen. Immediately after we end today, I'm sure it'll come to me how to do that. Okay, so if we go to Exodus 25, place the cover on top of the ark and put in the ark the tablets of the covenant and law that I will give you. There above the cover, between the two cherubim that are over the ark of the covenant law, I will meet with you and give you all my commands for the Israelites. Okay, so that cover was very specific. It was the place of meeting. It was the place where we're given mercy. We looked at Ezekiel 1, and then if we take a look at Leviticus 16, the Lord spoke to Moses after the death of the two sons of Aaron who died when they approached the Lord. The Lord said to Moses, tell your brother Aaron that he is not to come whenever he chooses into the most holy place behind the curtain in front of the atonement cover on the ark, or else he will die. For I will appear in the cloud over the atonement cover. Now, here it's referred to as the atonement cover, as opposed to the mercy seat, but it's the same. It is the place where God essentially ignores our sin. He grants to us mercy. We are worthy of punishment, but he chooses not to mete out the punishment. Hence, that is mercy. This is how Aaron is to enter the most holy place. He must first bring a young bull for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. He is to put on the sacred linen tunic with linen undergarments next to his body. He is to tie the linen sash around him and put on the linen turban. These are sacred garments, sacred meaning these are set apart just for this use. So he must bathe himself with water before he puts them on. From the Israelite community, he is to take two male goats for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. He's to offer the bull, notice, for his own sin offering. Now, we've been reading in Hebrews that Jesus did not have to offer a sacrifice for himself. Because he did not have to offer a sacrifice for himself, his sacrifice was able to be applied to someone else. Because he is God, his sacrifice is sufficient for everyone else. So Aaron is to offer the bull for his own sin offering to make atonement for himself and his household. Now, we don't normally think about it, but bulls were very expensive. Okay, and a bull could impregnate many um, female bovine, and so the bull was particularly valuable, and the the bull uh, wasn't typically eaten. It wasn't typically killed for food. Likewise, we read about the lambs and so on and being sacrificed. Well, normally lambs had value. The sheep, as they would grow, would give wool. They provided clothing. They were a source of income. And if you killed one, you just shut down one of your sources of income. Okay, and so it's kind of surprising to realize that the sacrifice was a sacrifice, that it wasn't just, oh, let's just take one of the herd. It has, there's kind of extra there. No, they each earned income, and so the bull, though, even more so. And so it was a very valuable sacrifice. Well, then he is to take the two goats and present them before the Lord at the entrance to the tent of meeting. He is to cast lots for the two goats, one lot for the Lord, the other for the scapegoat. And the scapegoat was going to be the one upon which the sin would be placed. Aaron shall bring the goat whose lot falls to the Lord and sacrifice it for a sin offering. But the goat chosen by Lot as the scapegoat will be presented alive before the Lord to be used for making atonement by sending it into the wilderness as a scapegoat. And then it goes through the rest about the slaughtering. And then he ultimately take the blood behind the curtain and do with it as he did with the bull's blood, sprinkle it on the atonement cover and in front of it. In this way, he will make atonement for the most holy place because of the uncleanness and rebellion of the Israelites, whatever their sins have been. He is to do the same for the tent of meeting, which is among them in the midst of their uncleanness. So, in other words, he pours blood around on the tent of meeting. No one is to be in the tent of meeting from the time Aaron goes in to make atonement in the most holy place until he comes out, having made atonement for himself, his household, and the whole community of Israel. So now, the tent of meeting, as would be the case with the temple afterwards, was divided into two parts: the holy place, the outer room, if you will, and the inner room, the inner sanctum, the inner holy place. And that inner holy place was separated with a veil, a massive veil. And only Aaron, and then ultimately the high priest after him, could go in to the Ark of the Covenant, into the most holy place, and then only once a year. The one exception was Moses. Moses had access anytime. And you recall the discussions we've had in the past that Josephus described how the high priest would go through lengthy ceremonial washings, described also here in Leviticus. But then he adds a few details. They tied a rope to the high priest's foot, and he had bells on the bottom of his robes so they could hear him moving around. And if they didn't hear him for a while and he didn't respond to their calls, they would presume that he was dead, and they would pull him out. And so there was this great fear that existed going there in front of the Ark of the Covenant. So what we see then is this was a very holy place. It was something that very limited access, and that other than the times it was carried out into battle and such, um, once it was in the tent of meeting, it really wasn't seen. It was there, but it wasn't seen. Now, some of the places that it was seen, crossing the Jordan in Joshua chapter 3. So when they crossed the Jordan, the ark went ahead of them, went first. Around Jericho, they marched around Jericho for 7 days. The Ark of the Covenant went first. And so when they went into battle, in most cases, although not all, they carried it into battle. Ultimately, it was wound up being captured by the Philistines. The Ark was the central part of worship. If the Ark wasn't there, there was no point to worship because God was not manifesting himself above the ark. At least certainly he wasn't there in the tabernacle or in the temple. So it was central to tabernacle and temple worship. And I say symbol of God's presence and holiness, it was more than a symbol. Um, it was a replica of what you would find if you are in heaven. It's a replica of what Ezekiel saw that he describes. And you have the people aware that God is simultaneously holy, separate from us, completely separate. But at the same time, there is this limited access, just this little bit of access to him. And that the high priest represents you and represents all the people once a year. And the purpose that the high priest goes in is so that he can offer a sacrifice for our sin to God. So therefore, it's teaching about this obligation to God. So it's a teaching tool, but it's more than that. It is there's a sense almost in which it's like kids playing with a dollhouse, and getting an idea of what it must be like for little girls to become mommies, and they're playing with these dolls and they're playing with other things as well. But it's not the real thing, but it's pointing to the real thing. Well, there's an aspect to the ark in which it was the real thing because God would manifest himself above the ark. The ark itself was not magical, but God imbued it with something unique and special. Okay, so then it disappeared. The Babylonian exile is the last time that we know it existed for sure, that it's mentioned. Now, we suspect it was in the temple built by Herod, but the post-captivity. But we can't say that absolutely. Some think it was just hidden somewhere, or that it was taken to Ethiopia. In fact, if you go to Ethiopia, you'll find that there are several groups that claim they have the Ark of the Covenant. And you can even, in some cases, take a tour to see the Ark of the Covenant. And in fact, it may well be in Ethiopia. There is a group of Jews who are African, who are ebony black in their coloring, and they have full rights as Jews, rights of return, because there's the acknowledgement that they are Jews. Okay, and so is it possible? It's possible, and there are speculations about that. There's possibilities just lost. I doubt that. Or that it's been destroyed. That's certainly a possibility as well. But I think we would have heard more about the details of its destruction. More likely, it's hidden away. It could be in Ethiopia. It could be somewhere else. It may be that as they continue to do excavations in Jerusalem, that they will find the Ark of the Covenant hidden somewhere. Certainly a possibility. We don't know. Okay, now, what is important is the relationship between the Ark of the Covenant and Jesus. So if we take a look at Romans, there is no difference between Jew and Gentile, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. All are justified freely by his grace through the redemption that came by Christ Jesus. Now, you may be very familiar with that verse, that all fall short of the glory of God. And then we read in verse 25, and where was the glory of God? Well, the glory of God was manifested in the temple. That's the place on earth where it was manifested. And it was manifested above the Ark of the Covenant. God presented Christ as a sacrifice of atonement. Okay, and so that was the sacrifice on Yom Kippur, the sacrifice for the sins of the people, through the shedding of his blood. And then how is it applied to us to be received by faith? He did this to demonstrate his righteousness, because in his forbearance, he had left the sins committed beforehand unpunished, as he did it to demonstrate his righteousness at the present time, so as to be just and the one who justifies those who have faith in Jesus. Okay, so what this is telling us is that the sacrifice of the high priest was not the real sacrifice. The real sacrifice was the sacrifice of Jesus. And we've been reading about that in the book of Hebrews in 10 and 11. It makes it very clear, actually 9, 10, and 11, it makes it very clear that the sacrifice of bulls and goats accomplished absolutely nothing. Because if it had accomplished something, the high priests would have been able to finish their job. They would have been able to go home, and they would not have had to offer sacrifices day after day after day after day. In the case of Jesus, God makes very clear that he died once and for all. And that was it, one time, because it was accepted. And then he sat at the right hand of God the Father. Well, there were no chairs in the temple. There were no chairs in the tent of meeting. And the reason for that was work was never done. When they were there, they were working. And the work that was involved in offering those sacrifices was massive. Just imagine in your head a bull, a big bull that might weigh the better part of 1,000 pounds. Okay, it takes a lot of muscle to butcher the bull, to kill it, and then to carry it, to cook it, to do the various things that they had to do, to offer the sacrifice. And on some days, they offered hundreds and possibly thousands of sacrifices on that day. I would imagine if you saw a priest from that day, they would look like weightlifters. They would look pretty darn strong because they had to be. Okay, anyone who's been hunting and shot a large animal and had to get it back to camp, knows what it's like to butcher in the field and then have to bring things back. It's a lot of work. Okay, and so Jesus is the sacrifice. That picture of the animals being sacrificed was a picture of Jesus. And the place then of atonement is the place where Jesus is. And it's appropriated by faith. That's what this is saying. Okay, taught in the Old Testament. Now, in Hebrews 9, we read about the first covenant. And of course, the tablets of the first covenant were in the Ark of the Covenant, the Ark of the first covenant, and also referred to in the Old Testament as the Ark of the Testimony. The first covenant had regulations for worship and also an earthly sanctuary. A tabernacle was set up. In its first room were the lampstand and the table with its consecrated bread, and this was called the holy place. Behind the second curtain was a room called the most holy place, which had, okay, this is what we looked at, the golden altar of incense, the gold-covered Ark of the Covenant, and this ark contained the gold jar of manna, Aaron's staff that had budded, and the stone tablets of the covenant. Above the ark were the cherubim of the glory, overshadowing the atonement cover, but we cannot discuss these things in detail now. You know, wouldn't wouldn't it be wonderful if he had? Okay, the detail, a lot of the detail we don't have today. They, the writer certainly had it. We don't have it today, but we know enough. We don't know everything, but we know enough. But we can see that this is depicting something. And he says, when everything had been arranged like this, the priests entered regularly into the outer room to carry on their ministry. But only the high priest entered the inner room, that only once a year, never without blood, which he offered for himself. Again, that emphasis, he offered for himself and for the sins the people had committed, and note, in ignorance, specifically the sins of ignorance. The Holy Spirit was showing by this that the way into the most holy place had not yet been disclosed, as long as the first tabernacle was still functioning. Okay, now check that out. The Holy Spirit, who is the one who inspires Scripture, who speaks to us through God's Word, who wrote it basically through the people, was showing by this that the pathway, the way into the true most holy place, into the most holy place, had not yet been disclosed. Now, somebody would say at that time, well, wait a second. We know where it is. It's in the temple. It's in the tabernacle. No, it's saying the true holy place, the most holy place, had not yet been disclosed, the way into it, as long as the first tabernacle was still functioning. Okay, so that first tabernacle, that first tent, the temple, still functioning. And he says, this is an illustration for the present time, indicating that the gifts and sacrifices being offered were not able to clear the conscience of the worshiper. They're only a matter of food and drink and various ceremonial washings, external regulations applying until the time of the new order. The new order, the time of the new order. You'll see that written on the dollar bill in Latin. The new order, the time of the new order. But when Christ came, he ushered in the new order. He's a high priest of the good things that are now already here. Okay, we're on this side of the cross. We're on this side of the resurrection. We're on this side of Christ's sacrifice. Now it says the way he went was different from the way that the high priest went. He went through the greater and more perfect tabernacle that is not made with human hands. Okay, so do you see that the tabernacle on earth was a copy of the greater and more perfect tabernacle in heaven? And goes on to say, when not made by human hands, what does that mean? Well, that means, that is to say, is not a part of this creation. So there was another creation. And that other creation included the creation of the angels. Okay, and we know they were created before Adam was created. They were created before this universe was created. They were part of another creation. And that space above the Ark of the Covenant throughout the Old Testament period from Moses forward till the time of Jesus, as long as it was there and it existed, was in essence a doorway into the presence of God. Now, it wasn't for us to rise into his presence, rather it was him to communicate with Moses and potentially with others in that seat above the Ark of the Covenant. And so you would see this incredibly bright light, the Shekinah glory. Shekinah just means that dwells with us. It's Aramaic. That Shekinah glory. In John chapter 1, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then it continues on to say that he tabernacled in our midst. That's the King James translation. He tented in our midst. That tent was like the skin of Jesus. The tent was covered with the skins of animals, but it really was a picture of Jesus. And what was contained within Jesus was the glory of God, the Shekinah glory. He was the Shekinah glory. He was the light, according to John chapter 1, that came into this world. John said, I'm not the light. John was not the light, but Jesus was the light that gives light to every man, potentially every man, every woman, every child, potentially, if they trust him. And then we find out later, Paul says that there's this mystery, which is Christ in you. And he goes beyond that, the Messiah in you, not the external Messiah, but the Messiah in you, that it's more than just a person who is separate. Jesus is a person who can actually possess you. And beyond that, Paul writes, we have this glory in jars of clay. He says, what? Do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit? It's the idea that the tent is really like Jesus as he walks here on the earth, and his skin, he's God with skin on, inhibits people from seeing who he is on the inside. Now, in the Mount of Transfiguration, Peter, James, and John saw him as he was. He displayed his glory, and they saw him. He was like lightning. His face was like lightning. His face was like the sun. You read about it again in Revelation chapter 1, when John attempts to describe him. Okay, and so the tabernacle, it's mobile here on earth, but then we have the temple, which winds up being a much more permanent structure, which is an image of what you have ultimately in heaven. The body that Christ dwells in is an eternal body. Now, he is eternal from eternity past, but he only took on a body at the incarnation, when he was conceived. But that body that he took on was a mortal body. And he made that body, he converted that body into an eternal body. And that is what he will do for us. He was transfigured on the mount so that they could see who he was inside, but he did not take on a new body. But when he was raised from the dead, he went before God the Father, and he took on a new eternal body with marks and indications and appearance, so that people who had seen him before would know who he was. Likewise, we will take on an eternal body that will be a body that will be recognizable, but different, because it will be permanent. And when you look at 2 Corinthians chapter 5, well, we know that if this earthly tent, this earthly tabernacle is just a $10 word for 10. If this earthly tent we live in is destroyed, we have a building from God. Now, the word for building is the word hieron, which is also a temple, but it's the idea of a permanent structure, a building, an eternal house in heaven, not built by human hands. Well, we saw that phrase, not built by human hands, means not of this creation. So we have a body prepared for us by God that is not part of this creation. That is what we are going to. That is the transition that we make when we die. Now, the timing that we get it is up for discussion. Do you get that when you die? Do you get that only at the rapture? There's no question that by the time we get to the rapture, that everyone will have a new body. That Behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all die, but we shall all be changed. We shall all be transfigured, metamorphosed, changed in form, in an instant, in a flash. And so you see this, the mercy seat and the glory above it, and the relationship with Christ, and the picture and the rest. This is all tied to our life, our death, the degree to which we are forgiven of sin, which is totally and absolutely. And what's interesting when you look at 2 Corinthians chapter 5, it says, while we are here, meanwhile, that's what that is, while we are here on earth, we groan. Okay, it's a struggle, longing to be clothed instead with our heavenly dwelling. We desire eternity. We desire to live forever. More money is spent in the last few weeks of life trying to extend it than, generally speaking, all the time up through that. And when it says longing to be clothed instead with our heavenly dwelling, it's talking about having this new body. Jesus said, behold, I go to prepare a place for you. Well, the word is meno. We get our word remain from that. Meno, and it's the idea of an abiding place, an abode, if you will. And when you look at John chapter 15, and Jesus talks about abiding in him, and he is giving us a new abode. It's talking about our bodies. The mansions are not these houses that are up there really decorated beautifully or with extra rooms or massive or whatever, but it's really these new bodies. We groan and are burdened because we do not wish to be unclothed, but to be clothed instead with our heavenly dwelling. So in other words, we don't want to die and just be wandering spirits, but we want to be eternal. We don't want to have to deal with sickness. We don't want to have to deal with death. We don't have to want to deal with struggle and suffering. Jesus not only gives us eternal life, he gives us a life where every tear is wiped away. I mean, it's the image that is there in the Ark of the Covenant, the tabernacle and the temple. It's incredibly powerful, and it's central to everything that we can learn about Jesus and about God's plan for us. And in the book of Hebrews, the writer, whom I believe was Paul, is telling them, don't give all this up by playing around just with the model, with the things that were intended to teach you, the things that were intended to prepare you for Jesus. You want to deal with the real thing. You want to be with God. The only way is through Jesus. And that's it. There is no other way under heaven by which we must be saved. He continues on here in 5, so that what is mortal may be swallowed up by life. Now, the one who has fashioned us for this very purpose is God, who has given us the Spirit as a deposit, guaranteeing what is to come. Therefore, we are always confident and know that as long as we are at home in the body, we are away from the Lord.